Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, today we are unpacking something absolutely fascinating. It's a highly structured and, frankly, pretty provocative Change.org petition out of Canada. Now, whether you personally agree with it or not, we have to look at this because it is literally a blueprint. It's a massive call to action for frustrated tax-paying citizens who are actively pushing back against what they see as massive government overreach. So, let's dive right into it.
I am not a cow to be milked. I mean, wow, that is a bold namesake quote for a petition, right? Okay, let's dive into this, because the overarching theme here is just deep, palpable citizen frustration. The author is really trying to capture a sentiment that they believe a lot of everyday taxpayers are feeling right now. It's this growing sense of being treated not as, respected participants in a democracy, but literally just as a continuous revenue source to be drained by the state. So, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to cover 1. The core grievances. 2. The Citizens' Pledge. 3. Strategies for self-sufficiency. 4. The 4 systemic demands. And finally, 5. Evaluating the ultimatum.
All right, Section 1. Core grievances. Basically, the problem, according to the petition.
Now, the petition frames the whole evolution of government as this tragic loss of accountability. They argue that what started out purely as public service has completely mutated into this self-serving bureaucratic machine. They picture it as an entity where its appetite for power and taxes just keeps growing, totally regardless of who is actually in office or what the real economic conditions of everyday citizens look like.
Have you ever felt like your vote just didn't change the bottom line? Well, this frustration boils down to a super evocative claim in the text. They write, public consultations are theater. Literally, theater. The petition argues that governments have fundamentally just stopped listening to us. It states that ordinary taxpayers are basically the last ones heard and the very first ones billed, which makes all those shiny election time promises feel like, well, hollow theater.
Moving on to Section 2, the Citizens' Pledge, withdrawing support from the system.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast in economic behavior it shows. I mean, mainstream society usually pushes us to maximize our income, buy all the brand new goods, and work full-time, right? But this alternative, it flips the script entirely. It's asking signers to consciously reduce their taxable work, absolutely resist lifestyle inflation by buying secondhand, and actually maximize their unpaid time off. It is a very calculated, deliberate withdrawal from the standard consumer cycle.
And the document gets incredibly specific about the financial mechanics of all this, laying out a deliberate strategy for tax-sheltered wealth management. Think of this as their legal loophole strategy to basically withhold tax dollars. The petition urges citizens to aggressively maximize contributions to accounts like RRSPs, TFSAs, and FHSAs. It tells people to explore income splitting, rigorously track and claim every single eligible deduction, and, perhaps most radically of all, intentionally perform less paid work just to shrink their taxable footprint.
Okay, Section 3. Strategies for self-sufficiency. Operating outside the mainstream. Let's look at this highly practical, step-by-step approach they suggest for detachment. Step 1 is simply to repair items rather than replace them. Step 2, practice DIY for your home and vehicle so you can avoid paying for external services. Step 3 is growing your own food wherever possible. And Step 4 is totally bypassing corporate supply chains by buying directly from local farmers. These aren't just ideas, they are tangible lifestyle shifts aimed at building true, individual self-reliance.
And you know what? It doesn't stop with just the isolated individual. The petition strongly pushes for signatories to trade goods and services with other like-minded people. It explicitly calls for building community networks that operate entirely outside the mainstream economy. So they are essentially advocating for the creation of a totally parallel, localized civic structure. So, taking all of this in, we really have to ask, what are these individual actions actually building toward? I mean, if you're withholding your taxes, growing your own food, and bartering with your neighbors, what's the ultimate goal here? The pledge isn't just about opting out for the fun of it. It's framed as a coordinated strike. And as we know, a strike always has demands.
Which brings us to Section 4, the 4 systemic demands, the macro goals of the petition. And this brilliantly illustrates how underneath all the DIY repairs and the creative tax strategies, this entire movement boils down to just 4 foundational systemic demands. Let's unpack them.
The first demand is what they call real democracy. The petition defines this as a system where elected representatives must answer to their constituents first, not to party leaders, not to donors, and definitely not to lobbyists. It calls for free votes, but I want to draw special attention to this part.
It demands the right for citizens to actually recall elected officials between elections. They argue, why should people have to wait years to remove someone who no longer represents them?
For the second demand, the petition draws a massive line in the sand regarding freedom of speech and expression. It completely rejects any government-funded suppression or censorship of lawful speech. Furthermore, it demands an immediate end to any legislation that tries to create categories of approved or so-called harmful speech. It states very plainly that citizens, not governments, decide what ideas are worth hearing.
So the crucial point for the third pillar is government accountability. They aren't just asking for empty promises anymore. They are urgently demanding mechanisms with actual teeth to hold officials in check. We're talking publicly accessible, line-by-line spending transparency. We're talking independent oversight that has real enforcement power, strict limits on corporate lobbying, and term limits for elected officials to stop the long-term entrenchment of power.
The fourth and final demand is limited government, and it focuses heavily on fiscal restraint. The petition specifically characterizes deficit spending as a hidden tax on future generations. To achieve this limited government, they demand the state live within its actual means, rather than just putting today's bills on tomorrow's credit card. They also demand that outdated regulations be repealed and that the government stops expanding into areas where local communities are, frankly, perfectly capable of governing themselves.
Finally, Section 5. Evaluating the ultimatum, what this all means for civic action.
Interestingly, the petition explicitly rejects the whole traditional left versus right political lens. They view it as a complete distraction. Instead, it reframes the entire battle as citizens versus institutional overreach. So it's everyday taxpayers pitted against this overgrown institution that they feel just no longer serves them. So what's the final set of instructions for the folks signing this? The Civic Action Protocol says that signatories should engage in conventional politics only to vote for parties and candidates that actively oppose big government and high taxation. They're urged to support advocacy groups that align with individual liberty and, above all else, to encourage others to take the pledge.
Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative question based on the petition's premise. Can withdrawing our personal financial support through legal tax management and self-sufficiency actually force massive, systemic, institutional change? It's this striking tension, right? Using personal withdrawal as a tool for sweeping democratic reform. Whether you think this is a viable roadmap or just an impossible ultimatum, it is, without a doubt, a vivid snapshot of modern civic frustration. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I'm going to leave you to ponder that question. See you next time.